In the heart of Manhattan, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, the Grand Sterling Hotel stood as a monument to luxury and privilege. But on this particular evening, its opulent piano lounge would become the stage for something far more valuable than wealth. It would witness the unmasking of a truth that money could never buy. Her name was Emily Hart, though few in that glittering lobby knew what that name once meant to the world. To them, she was simply the waitress who moved with unusual grace, who handled delicate glassware with fingers that seemed almost too refined for her simple uniform. What they didn't know was that those hands had once commanded standing ovations at Carnegie Hall, that those fingers had danced across ivory keys in the world's most prestigious concert halls, that the woman serving their champagne had once been called the brightest star in classical piano. But that was before the tragedy that shattered everything, before Emily Hart vanished from the stages that once celebrated her name. The Grand Sterling wasn't just a hotel. It was a kingdom where the wealthy came to see and be seen, where a single dinner could cost more than most people earned in a week. Emily had worked here for 2 years, ever since she'd arrived in New York, with nothing but a worn suitcase and a heart still heavy with grief. She'd learned the rhythms of this world, the way to make herself invisible while anticipating every need, the art of moving through crowds without disturbing the conversations of people who never looked at her face. She'd mastered it all except one thing: the piano. It sat in the center of the hotel's lounge like a beautiful wound. A Steinway grand, its polished surface reflecting the soft amber glow of overhead lights. Most evenings, a hired pianist played gentle melodies that served as soundtrack to the clinking of glasses and murmured business deals. But on Thursdays, the lounge stood silent, the piano unused, and Emily could almost pretend it wasn't there. She always volunteered for other sections on Thursdays. Her manager, Michael, had stopped asking why. He was a kind man, perhaps too kind for this business, and he'd learned that everyone who worked at the Grand Sterling carried their own private sorrows. He'd noticed how Emily's hands trembled slightly whenever she passed too close to the piano, how her eyes would flicker toward it, and then quickly away, as if even looking caused pain. What Michael didn't know was that Emily heard music everywhere, in the rhythm of footsteps across marble floors, in the percussion of silverware against fine china, in the whispered conversations that filled the air like an orchestra tuning before a performance. She heard it all, and it was both a gift and a curse, a reminder of everything she'd lost. Jonathan Pierce arrived at the Grand Sterling the way he arrived everywhere, with expectations that the world would rearrange itself to suit his preferences. At 45, he'd built a real estate empire that stretched across 3 continents, and he'd learned that money could buy almost anything, including, he believed, the right to treat people as if they existed solely for his convenience. The bellhops recognized him immediately. They always did. Mr. Pierce stayed in the presidential suite 4 times a year, always made the same demands, and never tipped more than he thought people deserved, which in his calculation wasn't much. Emily was refilling water glasses in the main dining room when Michael approached his expression apologetic. She knew that look. It meant a difficult guest, and it meant she'd been chosen to handle them. The presidential suite. Michael said quietly, "Mr. Pierce, he's requested service for a private dinner tonight in the piano lounge." Emily's stomach tightened. "The piano lounge, of course." "Michael, I can't." "I know," he interrupted gently. "I tried to assign someone else. He specifically requested you. Apparently you served him last time he was here. He said you were, and I quote, acceptably competent." Emily closed her eyes briefly. Acceptably competent. She'd spent years training her fingers to perform movements that most people couldn't achieve in a lifetime, and she was acceptably competent at carrying plates. What time, she asked. 8 o'clock. Just him and his daughter. That detail surprised her. In her previous encounters with Jonathan Pierce, she'd seen no evidence that he had family. No wedding ring, no phone calls that softened his perpetually stern expression, no photographs displayed on his phone screen during the countless times he'd scrolled through it while ignoring the people serving him. But when they arrived that evening, the daughter was real. Lily Pierce was 16, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes that seemed to apologize for her father before he even spoke. She wore jeans and a vintage band t-shirt completely at odds with her father's tailored suit and the grandeur of their surroundings. "You're late," Jonathan said to Emily, though she'd arrived precisely at 8. Punctuality, she'd learned, was whatever time he decided it should be. "Good evening, Mr. Pierce. Miss Pierce, I'll be serving you tonight." Lily smiled at her. A real smile, warm and genuine. "Thank you. And please just call me Lily." Jonathan didn't look up from his phone. "We'll have the tasting menu, the wine pairing, and make sure the temperature in here is adjusted. It's too warm." Emily nodded, making mental notes, aware that Jonathan was the kind of guest who would find fault no matter how perfectly things were executed. As she turned to place their order, Lily spoke again. "Is that piano played often?" "It's beautiful." Emily's hand tightened on her notepad. "There's usually a pianist Thursday through Saturday evenings." "Do you play?" Lily asked, and there was genuine interest in her voice, the kind that suggested she actually cared about the answer. Emily hesitated, feeling Jonathan's eyes on her for the first time that evening. "I used to. A long time ago." "Everybody used to do something," Jonathan said dismissively. "Usually things they weren't good enough to continue." The dinner service began, and with it Emily felt the familiar weight of being invisible while being constantly watched. Jonathan Pierce had that quality. He seemed to pay no attention to the people serving him, yet he noticed every tiny imperfection. A water glass filled to the wrong level. A wine poured half a second too early. The way Emily had placed his fork, which was apparently 3 millimeters off from where it should have been. Lily, by contrast, tried to make conversation. She asked Emily about how long she'd worked at the hotel, whether she enjoyed it, what she did on her days off. Questions that suggested she saw Emily as a person rather than a service provider. It was disarming and painful all at once, because kindness from strangers had a way of cracking the careful walls Emily had built around her heart. Between courses, while Jonathan scrolled through his phone with the intensity of someone managing an empire that couldn't survive without his constant attention, Lily wandered to the piano. She ran her fingers lightly across the closed keyboard cover, not opening it, just touching it with a reverence that Emily recognized. "Do you play?" Emily asked, surprising herself by initiating conversation. "I want to," Lily said. "I've been teaching myself from YouTube videos, but Dad thinks it's a waste of time. He says the arts don't build wealth." "The arts build other things," Emily said quietly, then immediately regretted it when she felt Jonathan's gaze sharp as a blade. "Really?" he said, setting down his phone. "Enlighten me. What exactly do the arts build besides debt and delusion?" Emily kept her expression neutral, a skill perfected over 2 years of service work. Beauty, understanding, connection between people. Connection. Jonathan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I can buy connection. I can buy anything. What I can't buy is competence, which seems increasingly rare." He was baiting her. Emily could feel it. Some people fed on conflict the way others fed on food, and Jonathan Pierce was clearly starving. Lily returned to the table, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Dad, please. Please, I'm simply making conversation. Our waitress here believes in the power of the arts. Perhaps she can demonstrate. You said you used to play piano. Play something for us." Emily's hands holding the wine bottle she'd been about to pour began to tremble. "I don't play anymore." "Of course you don't. Because you probably weren't very good. People who quit, usually, aren't." "Jonathan, that's enough." Lily's voice was firm, and Emily noticed Jonathan's surprise at being challenged by his daughter. But he recovered quickly, his smile turning cruel. "I'm simply curious. Here we are in a room with a magnificent instrument, and we have someone who claims to have played. It seems a shame to waste the opportunity. Unless, of course, you were never really a pianist at all, just someone who took a few lessons and developed delusions of grandeur." The words hit Emily like physical blows, not because they were true, but because they echoed the voice in her own head. The voice that had whispered to her every day for 5 years that she'd lost the right to call herself a pianist. That she'd lost everything the night David died. 10 years ago, Emily Hart's name appeared on marquees across the country. Not as a waitress, not as someone acceptably competent. As a virtuoso. As a prodigy who'd been called the most promising young pianist of her generation. She'd been born with something that couldn't be taught. An intuition for music that went beyond technique or training. By age 7, she was performing at local recitals. By 12, she'd won her first national competition. By 18, she'd been accepted to Juilliard with a full scholarship and recommendations from some of the most respected pianists in the world. Her professors had called her extraordinary. Critics used words like luminous and transcendent. But Emily had never thought of herself that way. To her, playing piano wasn't about being extraordinary. It was about becoming the music itself, about disappearing into something larger and more beautiful than her individual existence. At Juilliard, she'd met David Chen, a pianist whose technical brilliance matched her emotional depth. Where Emily played with passion, David played with precision. Where she felt music as color and texture, he understood it as architecture and mathematics. Together, they were complete. They fell in love the way musicians do through sound before words. Through late-night practice sessions that turned into dawn conversations. Through the shared understanding that music was not what they did, but who they were. By the time Emily was 23, she was performing at Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center. She and David had married in a small ceremony with just their families, then honeymooned in Vienna, spending their days exploring concert halls and their nights in tiny cafes talking about the future they would build together. They became known in classical music circles as a golden couple. Young, talented, deeply in love, and seemingly blessed by fortune itself. Magazines featured them. Documentary filmmakers followed them. Young pianists looked to them as proof that you could have both an artistic life and a happy one. Emily's signature piece became Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Critics said she played it with an understanding beyond her years, finding depths of emotion in the music that even seasoned performers missed. When she performed it at Boston Symphony Hall, the standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes of applause that washed over her like waves, and somewhere in that crowd, David stood with tears streaming down his face, because he understood what she'd just done. She'd taken her pain, her joy, her love for him, and transformed it into something that touched everyone who heard it. That was the night everything changed. The night her life split into before and after. The last night that music felt like a gift instead of a curse. The performance had been perfect. Emily remembered that with crystalline clarity. Every note exactly where it needed to be. Every phrase shaped with the kind of emotional precision that comes maybe once in a lifetime. The orchestra had been flawless. The conductor had embraced her after the final note, whispering that he'd never heard a more beautiful performance. David had been in the front row, as he always was for her important concerts. He'd flown in from Chicago, where he'd been performing with the symphony there. Canceled his own rehearsal to be present for hers, because that's what they did for each other. They showed up. After the performance, after the standing ovation, and the backstage congratulations, and the flowers and champagne, Emily had been exhausted in the way that only comes after pouring everything you have into a performance. David had insisted on driving, even though he was tired too. Even though it was late and the roads were slick with November rain, they'd been talking about the future, about the European tour they'd been offered for the following summer, about buying a house, maybe starting a family soon. Emily remembered laughing at something David said, remembered the warmth of his hand finding hers between the seats, remembered the way he looked at her with such pride and love that it made her heart ache. She didn't remember the truck that ran the red light, didn't remember the impact or the sound of metal tearing, didn't remember the moment between one breath and the next when everything she loved was taken from her. She woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. Broken ribs, fractured wrist concussion. The doctor said she was lucky. The word felt obscene. Lucky. When David was gone, when the last thing he'd experienced was terror and pain, when she'd survived and he hadn't for no reason except the random cruelty of physics and timing. The funeral was attended by hundreds. Musicians, students, family friends. Emily sat in the front row, her wrist in a cast, her body aching, her mind unable to process the finality of the closed casket in front of her. People kept saying things to her. Condolences that meant nothing. Assurances that time would heal. Empty words that evaporated the moment they reached her ears. What nobody told her was that grief would feel like drowning. That she would wake up every morning for months, and for a brief moment forget that David was dead. Then remember. And have to survive that moment of remembering over and over again, each time as devastating as the first. The classical music community expected her to return, to heal through music the way the heroines in stories always did. Her agent called with offers. Orchestras sent condolences along with performance invitations. Everyone assumed that Emily Hart would do what she'd always done. Play. But she couldn't. The first time she tried 3 months after the funeral, she'd made it as far as sitting at the piano bench. Her hands hovered over the keys. And in her mind, all she could hear was the sound of the crash, the moment of impact. David's final breath. Every time she tried to hear music, she heard death instead. She tried therapy, tried medication, tried forcing herself to play through the panic attacks. Nothing worked. The piano, which had been her voice for her entire life, had become her tormentor. 6 months after the accident, Emily's agent stopped calling. Concert halls stopped sending invitations. The classical music world, which had once celebrated her, moved on to the next young prodigy. Because there was always another talent waiting. Always someone else to fill the stages she'd abandoned. Emily sold her apartment in Boston, the one she and David had shared. Sold the Steinway grand piano that had been her most precious possession. Donated most of their belongings to charity because looking at them was unbearable. She kept only a few photographs and David's wedding ring, which she wore on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes. Then she disappeared. She moved to New York, a city large enough to get lost in. Applied for jobs that had nothing to do with music. Became invisible in a way she'd never been when she was on stage. And eventually she found herself at the Grand Sterling Hotel, serving champagne to people who had no idea that the woman filling their glasses had once been someone they might have paid hundreds of dollars to hear perform. It had been 5 years since the accident. 5 years since she'd touched a piano. 5 years of believing that part of her life was over forever. The memory of that old life crashed over Emily as she stood in the piano lounge, Jonathan Pierce's mocking words hanging in the air between them. She was aware of Lily looking at her with concern, of the other diners in the lounge beginning to notice the tension at the table, of Michael standing near the entrance, his expression worried. "I'm not a performer anymore," Emily said quietly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "If you'd like entertainment, I can arrange for our regular pianist to—" "I don't want your regular pianist," Jonathan interrupted. "I want to see if you're telling the truth, if you actually played or if you're just another service worker with fantasies of being special. Dad, stop it." Lily's voice was sharp now, angry in a way that seemed unusual for her. "You're being cruel for no reason. I'm being honest. Something this generation seems allergic to. Everyone wants to be special. Nobody wants to put in the actual work." He turned his attention back to Emily, his eyes cold. "So here's an offer. Play something. Anything. If you're actually good, truly good, I'll give you $1,000 tip. If you're mediocre, you get nothing. And if you refuse, well, that tells me everything I need to know about your supposed talent." Emily felt the trap closing. Refuse and confirm his contempt. Play poorly and prove his point. Play well and expose herself to feelings she'd spent 5 years trying to bury. But there was something else happening too. A stirring in her chest. Anger. For 5 years, she'd accepted other people's dismissal. She'd made herself small and invisible. She'd believed that she'd lost the right to call herself a pianist. But standing here being mocked by a man who understood nothing about sacrifice or loss or what it cost to love something so much that losing it felt like losing the ability to breathe something in, Emily shifted. She looked at the piano, that beautiful, terrible instrument, and for the first time in 5 years she didn't hear the sound of the crash. She heard David's voice from a memory. From years ago when she'd been struggling with a particularly difficult piece and wanted to give up. "The music doesn't leave you, Emily," he'd said. "Even when you leave it. It's patient. It waits." She walked to the piano. Each step felt like walking through water. Heavy. Difficult. But possible. Behind her she heard the room go quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The gentle clink of silverware ceased. Even the kitchen sounds from beyond the lounge seemed to fade. Emily reached the piano and stood before it, her hands trembling. She could walk away. Should walk away. This wasn't her world anymore. She was a waitress, not a concert pianist. That life was over. But then Lily spoke, her voice soft and kind. "You don't have to do this." And Emily realized something. Maybe she didn't have to. But maybe she wanted to. Not for Jonathan's $1,000. Not to prove anything to a man whose opinion meant nothing. But for herself. For David. For the girl she'd been who lived for nothing but the feeling of music flowing through her fingers. She sat down at the piano bench. The familiar position. Her spine straight. Her hands finding their natural position above the keys. She took a breath, then another feeling, her heart racing so fast she thought she might pass out. Then she touched the keys. The piano was in perfect tune. Of course it was. The Grand Sterling employed only the best technicians. Emily's fingers rested on the keys, not pressing, just touching, feeling the cool ivory beneath her skin. This moment, this single breath before sound began, had once been her favorite part of performing. The infinite possibility contained in silence. But now it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. In her mind, images flickered rapid fire. David's face, The hospital, the funeral, the empty apartment, the piano she'd sold. 5 years of avoiding music the way an addict avoids their drug of choice, knowing that one taste could shatter the fragile sobriety she'd built. Her hands began to shake harder. She could feel sweat beading at her temples despite the cool air conditioning. Behind her, she heard someone shift in their seat. Heard the soft intake of breath that meant people were growing uncomfortable with her silence. She could still leave. Stand up, apologize, return to her role as invisible server. Jonathan would mock her, but she'd survived worse than his contempt. She could survive this, too. But something kept her rooted to the bench. A stubbornness she'd forgotten she possessed. Or maybe it was David's voice in her memory, clearer than it had been in years. You know what separates good pianists from great ones? He'd asked her once, late at night in their apartment, both of them too wired after performances to sleep. Good pianists play the notes. Great ones play the silence between the notes. They play the breath, the pause, the moment of anticipation. That doesn't make sense, she'd said, laughing. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be true. Emily closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she could almost see him, the way he used to look at her when she played. The pride and love and wonder that made her feel like she could do anything. What would he say if he could see her now? 5 years frozen. 5 years of half-living. 5 years of punishing herself for surviving when he hadn't. He'd be disappointed. Not angry. David had never been angry, but disappointed that she'd let fear win, that she'd allowed the worst moment of her life to define all the moments that came after. "I'm so sorry," she whispered so quietly that only she could hear it. An apology to David, to herself, to the music she'd abandoned. And then, before she could think anymore, before she could find another reason to stop herself, Emily began to play. The first note was wrong, not technically. She hit the correct key, but it was hesitant, uncertain, the sound of someone who'd forgotten how to trust themselves. Emily chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, David's favorite piece. He'd called it the sound of moonlight on water. Simple enough that her rusty technique might manage it. Complex enough that it demanded feeling over flash. The second note was better, her muscle memory beginning to wake up, recognizing this familiar pathway even after years of disuse. By the fourth measure, her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The weight needed for each key. The precise pressure to make the piano sing rather than merely sound. She kept her eyes closed, afraid that if she opened them and saw the room, saw Jonathan's likely smirk or Lily's pity, she would lose her nerve entirely. So she played blind, finding her way through the piece, like navigating a dark room in a house she once knew by heart. The nocturne flowed through her fingers. It wasn't perfect. She could hear the places where her technique had degraded, the slight hesitation before difficult passages, the phrasing that wasn't quite as refined as it once had been. But beneath the imperfections, the music was still there, still beautiful, still true. And something else was happening too. The tightness in her chest, the panic that had gripped her since sitting down was beginning to loosen. Each phrase she played pushed back against the silence that had defined her life for 5 years. Each note was a small act of defiance against the grief that had convinced her she'd died in that car crash along with David. Tears began sliding down her face, but she didn't stop playing. Couldn't stop. Because this was what she'd been missing. Not just the music itself, but what music allowed her to do. To feel everything. The love and the loss. The beauty and the devastation. To hold all of it at once without being destroyed by it. Around her, the atmosphere in the lounge had shifted. The handful of diners who'd been present had stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped doing anything but listening. Several of the hotel staff had drifted to the entrance of the lounge, drawn by the sound. Michael stood near the doorway, his hand pressed to his mouth, tears in his eyes. He'd always suspected there was more to Emily's story. Now he was hearing it expressed in a language that transcended words. Even Jonathan had gone still. The smirk had faded from his face, replaced by something that might have been surprise, or possibly the first stirrings of recognition that he'd made a terrible miscalculation. But Emily wasn't playing for any of them. She was playing for David, for the man who'd believed in her when she was just a scared kid at Juilliard, unsure if she belonged, who'd held her hand before every major performance and told her that the audience was lucky to hear her, who'd loved her not because of her talent, but because of who she was when she played. Vulnerable, honest, completely herself. The nocturne built toward its emotional center, the passage that had always made her cry even before she understood what grief truly felt like. Now playing it with 5 years of loss behind her, the music took on new dimensions. It became a conversation with someone who couldn't answer, a love letter to the dead, a proof that beauty could exist alongside unbearable pain. She played the final measures, letting each note decay naturally, not rushing, letting the silence between the sounds speak as loudly as the sounds themselves. When the last note faded, she kept her hands on the keys, her eyes still closed, breathing hard, as if she'd run a marathon. The room remained silent. Not the awkward silence of uncertainty, but the profound silence of people who'd just witnessed something they didn't have words for. Emily opened her eyes. The room swam into focus through her tears. She saw Lily first, the girl's face wet with tears, her expression awestruck. Then Michael, still standing by the door, openly crying now. The other diners frozen with their hands halfway to their mouths or their wine glasses suspended in air. And Jonathan. His expression had transformed completely. The smug superiority was gone. In its place was shock, and possibly something else. Uncertainty, the look of someone who'd just realized they'd profoundly misjudged a situation. But before anyone could speak, before Emily could stand up and flee, like every instinct was screaming at her to do something else, happened. One of the diners, a woman in her 60s wearing an elegant black dress, stood up from her table. She moved closer to the piano. Her eyes narrowed in recognition. "I know you," the woman said slowly. "I know those hands, that phrasing. I've seen you play before." Emily's heart stopped. This was the moment she'd been avoiding for 5 years. The moment someone would connect the waitress to the pianist who'd disappeared. The woman pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "Emily Hart," she said, and the name rang through the lounge like a bell. The Emily Hart. The pianist who vanished 5 years ago after... She trailed off, her expression shifting to understanding and compassion. Oh my God. Other people were pulling out their phones now, searching, finding. The evidence of Emily's past life emerging in photos and videos and articles. A man at another table, I saw her at Carnegie Hall. 7-8 years ago. She was incredible. A younger woman. There was a documentary about her and her husband. They were both pianists. He died in a car crash. The woman in black held up her phone, showing a video to the room. Emily recognized it immediately. Her performance of Rachmaninoff at Boston Symphony Hall, the last time she'd played in public. The night everything ended. The video showed a different Emily. Younger, yes, but more than that. Alive in a way she hadn't been in years. Her face radiant as she played, completely lost in the music. The camera occasionally cut to David in the audience, his expression one of absolute love and pride. Someone in the lounge started playing the video with the sound on. The opening notes of the Rachmaninoff filled the room Emily's playing from 5 years ago, creating a strange duet with her present self. The contrast was stark. The old Emily played with the confidence of someone who'd never known real loss. The current Emily carried an entire world of grief in her posture alone. More phones came out, more searches. Within minutes, the entire room knew who she was, or who she'd been. Articles about the accident appeared, about David's death, about Emily's disappearance from the classical music world, about the theories that had circulated, that she'd been injured too badly to play, that she'd lost her mind, that she'd simply given up. "You're Emily Hart," Lily breathed, moving closer to the piano. "You're the Emily Hart. Oh my God. I've listened to your recordings. I learned piano from watching your videos. You're a legend." The word hit Emily like a slap. Legend. She wasn't a legend. Legends were people who'd accomplished great things. She was just someone who'd run away. But the room was abuzz now. Conversations breaking out. People showing each other videos and photos. The story spreading in real time through social media. Emily Hart found. Emily Hart alive. Emily Hart playing again. Jonathan stood up, his face pale. For once, in what Emily suspected was a very long time, he seemed at a complete loss for words. He looked at Emily, then at his daughter, then back at Emily. "I didn't..." He started, then stopped. "I had no idea." "Nobody did," Emily said quietly, finding her voice. That was the point. Michael had pushed through the small crowd that was forming. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you. I should have..." "It's okay," she interrupted, though she wasn't sure if it was. Her carefully constructed anonymity was shattered. The walls she'd built were crumbling, and strangely, terrifyingly, she felt almost relieved. The woman in black approached the piano, moving slowly, as if Emily might startle and flee. "Ms. Hart. I'm Clara Zimmerman. I teach at Manhattan School of Music. I saw you perform in Boston, the Rachmaninoff. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Emily's throat tightened. "Thank you. I thought you were dead," Clara said bluntly. "We all did. Not literally, but artistically. The music world mourned you like we'd lost you. You did lose me," Emily said. "I lost myself. But you're here now." Clara's voice was gentle. "You're playing again, even if it's just in a hotel lounge, even if it's not perfect. You're playing." And with those words, something inside Emily finally broke open. Not shattered. Broke open. Like ice cracking at the first touch of spring. She started to cry in earnest now. Not the quiet tears that had accompanied her playing, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere she'd kept locked tight for years. Lily moved first, stepping forward and wrapping her arms around Emily. A teenager she barely knew, offering comfort without hesitation. Then Clara joined them, her hand gentle on Emily's shoulder, and Michael, always kind, standing nearby in case he was needed. Even some of the other diners approached, not to gawk or to invade, but to offer quiet words of support. To tell her they'd loved her music. That they'd wondered what happened to her. That they were glad she was alive. Through it all, Jonathan stood apart, watching. His face had gone through a series of transformations. Shock. Understanding. And finally, unmistakably, shame. It took several minutes for the room to settle. For Emily to collect herself enough to stand on shaking legs. For the crowd that had gathered to respectfully step back, giving her space to breathe. Clara Zimmerman pressed a business card into Emily's hand. "Please call me," she said. "Whenever you're ready. If you're ready. The music world would welcome you back." But more importantly, I think you might need to come back. For yourself." Emily nodded, unable to form words, and tucked the card into her apron pocket. The other diners gradually returned to their tables, though the atmosphere in the lounge had fundamentally changed. People kept glancing at Emily, not with pity exactly, but with a kind of reverent curiosity, as if they had witnessed something sacred and were still processing what it meant. Michael approached quietly. "Take the rest of the night off," he said. "Take tomorrow too if you need it. Hell, take the week. I'll handle everything. I can't just leave." Emily protested weakly. "Yes, you can. I'm your manager, and I'm telling you to go home. Process this. Figure out what happens next." He paused. "And Emily, I'm glad they found out. I'm glad you played. You've been carrying this alone for too long." Emily wanted to argue, but she was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She'd been holding herself together with spit and wire for 5 years, and tonight those bonds had finally snapped. She needed to be alone, to think, to figure out what came next in a life that had just been turned completely upside down. But before she could leave, Lily approached her father, trailing behind her, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Thank you," Lily said simply. "For playing, even though my dad was horrible, even though it clearly hurt you. Thank you for sharing that with us." "I didn't do it for you," Emily said honestly. "Or for your father." "I know. That's what made it beautiful." Lily glanced back at Jonathan. "Will you tell him what you need to tell him? Please, I can't keep watching him treat people this way." Jonathan stepped forward, and Emily saw that his carefully cultivated armor of arrogance had developed cracks. "Ms. Hart," he began, then stopped. "Emily, I owe you an apology that I'm not sure I have the words to deliver adequately." "Then don't deliver it," Emily said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Not yet. You don't apologize because you got caught being cruel to someone famous. You apologize because you recognize that cruelty itself is wrong, that every person deserves respect regardless of their talent or status, or how much value you've assigned to their life." Jonathan flinched, as if she'd struck him. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right. I don't need your $1,000, Emily continued. "I don't need your approval or validation. What I need is for people like you to understand that the person serving your coffee, or cleaning your room, or parking your car is a complete human being with a full life and story that you know nothing about, and that your wealth doesn't give you the right to diminish that." The words came out with surprising force, 5 years of suppressed anger and grief channeling into something clear and true. Emily had spent so long making herself small, accepting the way people looked through her, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to claim space in a room, to speak truth without apology. Jonathan absorbed her words with visible discomfort. Good, Emily thought. Discomfort meant there might be hope for growth. "I was cruel," Jonathan said. "Not just tonight, but always, to staff to people I consider beneath me, which is nearly everyone." He glanced at Lily. "To my own daughter when she tries to pursue things I don't value. I've been telling myself it's just honesty, just high standards. But you're right, it is cruelty. And I'm sorry." Emily studied him. The apology felt genuine, but apologies were easy. Change was hard. "Do you know why I stopped playing?" she asked. "The accident," Jonathan said. "Your husband." "Yes. But it wasn't just losing him. It was losing my ability to find joy in the thing I loved most. Music became inseparable from loss, so I gave it up. I let fear and pain take something beautiful from me." She paused. "You're doing the same thing. Not with music, but with connection, with vulnerability, with the capacity to see other people as fully human. You lost someone too, didn't you? Jonathan's face went white. How did you? Your daughter mentioned your wife earlier. Past tense. And I recognize the signs. The way you've armored yourself against feeling anything. The way you've made cruelty your default because it's easier than risking genuine connection. For a long moment, Jonathan said nothing. Then 2 years ago, cancer. We had 18 months from diagnosis to... He couldn't finish the sentence. I'm sorry, Emily said, and meant it. Grief was grief regardless of who carried it. She was the kind one. Jonathan continued, his voice rough. She balanced me out, made me better. After she died, I told myself I needed to be harder, more focused on business, that emotions were a weakness I couldn't afford. He looked at Lily. I forgot that my daughter needed a father, not a business strategy. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Dad, I've been a terrible father, Jonathan said, and a terrible human being. I don't expect forgiveness. Not from you, Emily, not from anyone. But I want to change. I need to change. Emily could have walked away then, could have let Jonathan stew in his realization and moved on with her newly complicated life. But something about the rawness in his face, the genuine crack in his armor, made her pause. Change is possible, she said. I'm proof of that. I spent 5 years convinced I could never play again, that I'd lost that part of myself forever. And tonight, because of your cruelty, actually, I discovered I was wrong. I pushed you to this. Jonathan looked horrified. You did, but I also chose it. That's the thing about healing. Nobody can force it. But sometimes we need a catalyst, something that makes staying broken more painful than the risk of trying to mend. Lily had moved to stand beside her father, her hand finding his. The gesture seemed to surprise him, as if he'd forgotten that his daughter might still want physical connection with him. Mom loved piano music, Lily said quietly. She had this playlist she listened to all the time. Your recordings were on it, actually. I started learning piano because of her, because listening to it makes me feel close to her still. Jonathan closed his eyes. I didn't know that. Because you never asked. You just assumed it was a waste of time. I was wrong. He opened his eyes, looking at Emily. About everything. About music being worthless. About people in service positions being somehow less than. About my daughter's interests being trivial. He paused. Is it too late to fix this? Emily thought about David, about the conversations they'd had late at night, about legacy and meaning, about what they'd leave behind when they were gone. It's not too late, she said. But you have to do the work. You have to sit with the discomfort of seeing people as they really are, not as convenient props in your life. You have to remember that every person you encounter is carrying their own story, their own grief, their own complexity. Will you help me? Jonathan asked. Then, seeming to hear how that sounded, he amended, I'm not asking you to fix me. But Lily wants to learn piano seriously. She deserves a real teacher. And you... He gestured helplessly. You're extraordinary. Would you consider teaching her? Emily looked at Lily, saw the hope bright in the girl's eyes, saw a teenager who'd lost her mother and was desperately trying to hold on to connection through music. A story Emily understood too well. I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach, Emily said. I haven't played in 5 years. You played tonight, Lily said, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Not because it was perfect, because it was real. Real. Emily turned the word over in her mind. She'd spent so long trying to be invisible, trying to not feel, trying to exist in the narrow space between grief and function. But real meant feeling everything. The pain and the beauty. the loss, and the possibility of new connection. "I'll think about it," Emily said finally. "But I need time. Tonight was a lot." "Of course," Jonathan said quickly. "Take all the time you need. And please send me a bill for private lessons, whatever your rate is. If I do this," Emily said, "I won't be teaching to service a wealthy client. I'll be teaching because I see potential in your daughter, and because maybe teaching will help me find my way back to music fully. So we don't talk about rates or bills. We talk about what Lily wants to learn, and why." Jonathan nodded, and Emily could see him actively working to adjust his worldview in real time. It was uncomfortable to watch, but necessary. Growth always was. "There's something else," Emily said. "If I teach Lily, part of her education will include understanding music's power to connect us across class and background. So she'll occasionally come with me to volunteer music programs, to play for people who don't have access to private lessons or concert halls, to understand that music isn't a luxury for the wealthy. It's a human right. Jonathan started to protest, then stopped himself. "Yes. Okay. That sounds important." Lily was practically vibrating with excitement. "Really? You'll teach me?" "Maybe," Emily said. "Give me a week. Let me process everything that happened tonight. Then we'll talk." She pulled out her phone. "Give me your number. I'll text you." After Lily had entered her contact information, Emily turned to leave. But Michael was there holding out a small card. "The hotel's lawyer's information," he said quietly. "Some of those people were filming tonight. Videos are probably already online. You might want legal advice about protecting your privacy and image rights." Emily took the card, feeling the weight of implications she hadn't considered. Her anonymity was gone. Her past was public. Tomorrow her face would probably be all over music blogs and social media. Emily Hart found. Emily Hart returned. The narrative would write itself, and she'd have little control over the story. "It'll be okay," Michael said, reading her expression. "Different from what you planned." "But okay." Emily nodded, not trusting her voice, and finally left the piano lounge. As she walked through the hotel's marble lobby, she caught glimpses of people watching her, whispering, some with phones out, probably Googling her name right now. She pushed through the front doors into the cool New York night. The city hummed around her with its usual cacophony. Taxi horns, distant sirens, the rumble of subway trains beneath the streets. And underneath it all, Emily heard music. Not the haunting soundtrack of trauma that had defined her hearing for 5 years, but something new. Something that sounded almost like hope. She pulled David's ring from beneath her shirt, holding it in her palm. The metal was warm from being close to her heart. "I did it," she whispered to the night, to David, to herself. "I played again. I didn't think I could, but I did." The ring caught the streetlight, glinting gold. Emily closed her hand around it and started walking home, her feet finding the rhythm of a melody she'd forgotten she knew. 2 months later, Emily stood in a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn, looking at the sign above the door, Hart Music Academy. The name had been Lily's idea, and though Emily had initially protested that it was too presumptuous, too much like claiming a legacy she wasn't sure she'd earned, Lily had been insistent. "You're not claiming anything," the girl had said. "You're just being who you are." The academy wasn't large. 3 rooms on the first floor of a building that Jonathan had purchased and renovated. But it was enough. One room held a beautiful upright piano and space for private lessons. Another was set up for group classes. The third was a small performance space where students could practice playing for audiences without the pressure of a formal concert hall. The mission statement hanging in the entryway read, "Music education accessible to all, regardless of ability to pay." sliding scale tuition, need-based scholarships available, because music belongs to everyone. Jonathan had funded the initial setup, had paid for the renovations, the instruments, the supplies, but he'd done it with surprising humility, accepting Emily's conditions that this wasn't about charity or tax write-offs. It was about restitution, about taking wealth that he'd accumulated partly through treating people as disposable and channeling it toward something that honored their humanity. He was changing slowly. Emily saw it in the way he spoke to service workers now. The effort he made to remember names, to say please and thank you, to acknowledge people's existence beyond their function. It was awkward at first, his privilege so deeply ingrained that basic courtesy felt like foreign language. But he was trying, and that counted for something. Lily was Emily's first official student. They met 3 times a week, and what Emily discovered was that teaching gave her something she hadn't expected: distance from her own trauma. When she focused on Lily's technique, on helping the girl understand phrasing and dynamics and emotional truth in music, Emily could touch the piano without drowning in memory. She still had hard days. Days when she'd sit at the piano and hear the crash instead of music. Days when the weight of David's absence felt so crushing that she could barely function. But those days were becoming less frequent, and when they came, she'd learned to be gentle with herself, to remember that healing wasn't linear, that grief could coexist with joy. The academy's opening was small, just a few students Emily had recruited from local schools, kids who showed interest in music, but whose families couldn't afford private lessons. They ranged in age from 8 to 17, and their skill levels varied wildly. But they all shared something essential they wanted to learn. On opening day, Emily gave a short speech to the gathered students and their parents. She didn't hide who she was or what had happened to her. Didn't pretend that her path to this moment had been anything other than brutal and broken. "Music saved my life," she told them. Not in some poetic, metaphorical way. Literally. I was drowning in grief, and music threw me a rope. Not because it made the grief go away, but because it gave me a way to carry it that didn't destroy me. She told them about David, about the accident, about the 5 years she'd spent running from the thing she loved most, about the night in the hotel lounge when a cruel man's challenge had accidentally become the catalyst for her healing. "You don't have to have tragedy to deserve music," she said. "But you should know that music will be there for you when tragedy comes. When life breaks your heart, or shatters your world, or takes away the people you can't imagine living without. Music will be there. Patient. Waiting. Ready to hold whatever you need to express." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Jonathan, standing in the back with Lily, had tears streaming down his face. That first day, Emily taught a basic lesson on piano posture and hand position. Simple stuff. Foundational. But as she watched these kids, some of whom had never touched a piano before, carefully placing their fingers on the keys and producing their first tentative notes, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. The academy grew slowly but steadily. Word spread through community centers and schools. More students enrolled. Emily hired 2 additional teachers, both of them recent music school graduates who were passionate about accessible education. She started a scholarship fund specifically for students from families experiencing homelessness or financial crisis, remembering how close she'd come to that edge herself. 3 months after opening, Emily did something she hadn't planned. She organized a tribute concert for David. Small venue, intimate audience, all proceeds going to the Academy's scholarship fund. She played a program of pieces they'd loved: Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, and one composition she'd written herself in the weeks leading up to the concert. A piece she titled After the Silence. It was raw and unpolished, more emotional expression than technical showcase, but it was hers. Her story told in the only language that felt adequate. David's parents attended. Emily hadn't seen them since the funeral, hadn't been able to face their grief on top of her own. But they came, and after the performance, they embraced her with a forgiveness and love that she hadn't known she needed. "He would be so proud of you," David's mother whispered. "Not because you're playing again, but because you survived. Because you found a way back to joy." The concert was recorded by a local music blogger, and the video went viral. Not stadium-level viral, but enough that classical music publications picked up the story. Emily Hart's return became a narrative that people latched onto. The grieving widow who'd lost everything and found her way back to music. Emily had mixed feelings about the attention. She didn't want to be inspiration porn, didn't want her pain commodified into feel-good stories for people to consume. But she also recognized that her visibility served a purpose. It brought attention to the Academy. It challenged people's assumptions about what grief looked like and how healing happened. It reminded the classical music world that artists were human beings with complex inner lives, not performing machines. Concert offers started coming in, small ones at first, then larger venues. Eventually, her old agent reached out, hesitant, but hopeful. There was an appetite for her return, he said. Orchestras wanted to work with her. Festivals wanted to book her. Emily considered the offers carefully. Part of her wanted to say no to all of them, to protect the fragile peace she'd built, to avoid the pressure and scrutiny and expectations that came with public performance. But another part of her recognized that she'd been given something rare, a second chance, a resurrection of a life she'd thought was over. And David wouldn't have wanted her to hide from that. So she said yes, selectively. She agreed to perform at a benefit concert for a music education nonprofit, accepted an invitation to play at a small festival dedicated to contemporary classical music, took on a limited tour of 6 cities, all venues that felt manageable rather than overwhelming, and she made sure that a portion of every performance fee went directly to the Academy. That her return to public performance served the mission she'd committed to. Music for everyone, not just the elite. 6 months after that night in the hotel lounge, Emily's life had transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. But perhaps the most significant transformation was internal. She'd stopped running from grief and learned to walk alongside it instead. She thought about this as she prepared for a lesson with Lily. The girl had progressed remarkably. She had natural talent, yes, but more than that, she had the thing that couldn't be taught. She played with emotion, with truth. Like she understood instinctively that music wasn't about impressing people, but about communicating something that words couldn't express. Today's lesson was special. They were working on a Chopin nocturne, the same one Emily had played that first night. Lily had requested it, specifically wanting to learn the piece that had started everything. "Tell me what this piece is about." Emily said a question she asked with every new work they approached. Lily thought for a moment. "Longing," she said finally. "Missing something. Someone. Good. And what does longing feel like in your body?" This was Emily's teaching method. She didn't start with technique. She started with feeling, with helping students understand that music was a physical, emotional experience before it was an intellectual one. "It feels like," Lily paused, searching for words, "like something's pulling at my chest, like I'm reaching for something I can't quite touch. Perfect. That's what you need to express through your playing. Not perfect technique, not impressive runs, that feeling of reaching. Let your hands reach across the keys the way your heart reaches across loss. Lily played the opening passage. It was tentative at first, then growing in confidence. Emily could hear the improvement from even a month ago. More importantly, she could hear Lily beginning to trust herself. To trust that her emotions expressed through music were enough. When Lily finished the first section, Emily smiled. Better. Much better. You're starting to understand that the notes on the page are just a map. You have to find your own way through the territory. Is that what you do? Lily asked. It's what every musician does, whether they realize it or not. We bring ourselves to the music. Our experiences, our losses, our joy, everything we are flows through our fingers and becomes sound. Lily was quiet for a moment, her hands resting on the keys. Do you still think about him? Your husband. Every day, Emily said honestly. But it's different now. Before, thinking about him felt like drowning. Now it feels like remembering sunlight. Still bright, still warm, but not burning anymore. I think about Mom that way too. It used to hurt so much I couldn't breathe. Now it just hurts sometimes. Other times I remember the good parts and feel grateful instead of destroyed. That's healing, Emily said. Not forgetting, not getting over it, just learning to hold the love and the loss at the same time without breaking. They continued the lesson, working through the difficult middle section, where the left hand and right hand told different stories simultaneously. Emily showed Lily how to balance them, how to let one voice lead, while the other supported how to create the illusion of multiple conversations happening within a single piece. It was technical work, but it was also a metaphor. Life required the same balance, the ability to hold multiple truths at once, to be both heartbroken and hopeful, to grieve what was lost while still being open to what might come. After Lily left, Emily sat alone at the piano. She did this sometimes, just sat with the instrument that had been her first love, her career, her torture, and finally, her salvation. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. From child prodigy to concert pianist to waitress to teacher, each identity had felt complete at the time. Each had been necessary. She pulled David's ring from the chain around her neck. She didn't hide it anymore. Wore it openly now, a visible marker of love that death hadn't erased. I kept my promise, she said to the empty room, to David, to the universe. I didn't give up forever. Just for a little while. Just long enough to remember how to breathe. The ring caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. Gold, and warm, and eternal. Emily placed it carefully on top of the piano, then began to play. Not Chopin this time. Not Rachmaninoff. The piece she'd composed. After the silence. Her story told in music. The crash and the grief and the long, dark night. But also the morning after. The first bird singing. The stubborn insistence of hope. She played for David. For herself. For every student who would walk through the academy's doors looking for something they couldn't name, but recognized in music. For Jonathan and Lily, and everyone who'd witnessed her breaking open that night in the hotel lounge. And she played for what came next, for the future that was uncertain but possible, for the life that continued despite and because of loss, for the understanding that healing wasn't about returning to who you were before trauma. It was about becoming someone new. Someone who'd been to the depths and survived. Someone who knew that the capacity to feel crushing pain was inseparable from the capacity to feel transcendent joy. The music filled the room, spilled out into the street through the open window, reached ears that would never know Emily's name or story, but might feel for just a moment a little less alone in their own struggles. Because that's what music did. It built bridges across chasms of isolation. It said the things that couldn't be spoken. It proved that human beings could take their worst pain and transform it into something that made the world more beautiful. Emily played until her hands ached, until the light shifted and afternoon became evening, until she felt empty in the good way, the way that meant she'd poured everything out and could now refill with new experience. She ended with a soft chord, let it decay naturally, sat in the silence that followed, which was no longer terrifying, but peaceful. "Thank you," she whispered. To David, to music, to whatever force in the universe had let her survive when she didn't think she wanted to. Tomorrow, she would teach more students. Next week, she had a small performance scheduled. Next month, who knew the future was unwritten, which meant it could be anything. But today, this moment, Emily was simply grateful to be alive, to be playing, to have found her way back from the silence that had nearly consumed her. She placed David's ring back on its chain and walked to the window. Outside, Brooklyn hummed with life. Millions of people carrying their own stories, their own losses, their own small victories. Emily was one of them now. Not elevated above the human experience by talent or fame. Just one more person trying to make meaning from chaos. One more voice in the chorus that was humanity stumbling toward connection and grace, and that she realized was more than enough. The invitation arrived 3 months later. Boston Symphony Hall, a special commemoration concert marking the 10th anniversary of some of the hall's most memorable performances. They wanted Emily to perform the Rachmaninoff, the same piece she'd played the night everything changed. Her first instinct was to refuse. Boston held too many ghosts. The concert hall was where she'd last seen David alive, where their final conversation had happened, where she'd been happiest right before losing everything. But Lily Wise, beyond her 16 years, had different advice. "Maybe that's exactly why you should go back," she said. "To show yourself that beautiful things can happen in places where terrible things happened too. That one doesn't erase the other." Emily thought about it for a week. Played through the Rachmaninoff multiple times, testing whether she could survive its emotional weight. The piece had been her signature work, the music that defined her early career. Could she reclaim it? Or would it always belong to the ghost of who she'd been? In the end, she said yes, but on her terms. She would perform the Rachmaninoff, but the concert would be a benefit for music education programs serving underserved communities, and she would bring students from the academy to attend, to show them that concert halls weren't exclusive palaces for the elite, but spaces that belonged to anyone who loved music. The night of the performance, Emily stood backstage at Boston Symphony Hall, listening to the orchestra warm up. The sounds were achingly familiar. She'd performed on this stage a dozen times before the accident, had walked these halls as a rising star, confident in her talent and her future. That Emily felt like a stranger now. The woman standing backstage with trembling hands and a racing heart was someone different. Someone who'd been broken and poorly glued back together. Someone who understood that perfection was less important than presence, that technical mastery mattered less than emotional truth. Jonathan and Lily were in the audience. The academy students, too many of them attending their first classical concert. Emily's parents had flown in from Seattle. David's parents were there, front row, their presence both painful and necessary. And scattered throughout the hall were people who remembered Emily Hart from before. Critics who'd written glowing reviews of her performances, musicians who'd played with her, fans who'd followed her career and mourned her disappearance. The pressure could have been crushing. But Emily had learned something in the past year. She wasn't performing for them, wasn't trying to prove she was still the prodigy they remembered or to justify her return. She was playing because music was how she made sense of a world that often made no sense, because it was her language, and staying silent felt like suffocation. The stage manager gave her the signal. Emily walked out to applause that washed over her like a wave. She saw the orchestra members smiling at her, the conductor, a man she'd worked with years ago, nodding with encouragement and respect. She sat at the piano, the Steinway Grand that had witnessed countless performances, placed her hands on the keys, and took a breath. Then she began. The Rachmaninoff started softly, deceptively gentle. The opening notes like raindrops on a window, then building the orchestra joining her in conversation. Emily played with her eyes half closed, letting muscle memory guide her through passages she'd performed hundreds of times. But this time felt different. Before the accident, she'd played this piece with the passion of youth, with confidence and fire, and the certainty that she could conquer any musical challenge. Now she played it with the weight of experience, with an understanding of loss that transformed the music's inherent melancholy into something almost unbearably beautiful. The second movement broke her open, the lyrical section that felt like a love letter to something just out of reach. Emily thought of David, of the life they'd planned and never got to live, of the children they'd talked about having, the house they'd almost bought, the years of growing old together that had been stolen by random chance and bad timing. Tears streamed down her face as she played, but her hands never faltered. She'd learned that crying and performing weren't mutually exclusive, that showing emotion wasn't weakness, but authenticity, that audiences didn't want perfection. They wanted truth. The third movement crescendoed toward its climax. The orchestra swelled around her, and Emily felt herself lifted by the music. This was why she played. For these moments of transcendence, when the boundary between self and sound dissolved, when she became the music itself. The final chords rang out, powerful and definitive. Emily struck the last note and held it, letting it decay naturally, while the orchestra sustained their final breath. Then silence. The kind of profound silence that only comes after something sacred. Then the applause exploded. Standing ovation. Not polite classical music applause, but thunderous recognition of what they'd just witnessed. Not just a skilled performance, but a resurrection. A woman who'd been declared artistically dead, returning to prove that healing was possible. That you could lose everything and still find your way back to yourself. Emily stood, shaking, overwhelmed. She bowed to the orchestra, to the conductor, to the audience. And when she looked out into the crowd, she saw her students from the academy on their feet. Some of them crying, all of them beaming with pride. She saw Jonathan with his arm around Lily, both of them applauding. Saw Michael from the hotel, who'd somehow gotten a ticket, grinning through tears. Saw David's parents in the front row, and his mother mouthing he would be so proud. And for just a moment, Emily could almost feel David's presence. Not as a ghost or a haunting, but as a warm certainty that love didn't end with death. That it transformed into something else, something that could fuel creation and healing and growth. The applause continued. Flowers were brought to the stage. The conductor embraced her. And Emily, who'd spent 5 years making herself invisible, stood in the spotlight and let herself be seen. Not as the prodigy she'd been, not as the grieving widow she'd become, but as the complete person she was now. Broken and mended, scarred and strong, carrying loss and hope in equal measure. After the concert, there was a reception. Emily spoke with critics and musicians and fans, accepted congratulations, and deflected questions about her long absence with grace and honesty. And she wasn't hiding anymore, but she also wasn't selling her pain as entertainment. The Academy students gathered around her, buzzing with excitement about the performance. Several of them wanted to know if they'd ever be able to play like that. Emily smiled and told them the truth that technical skill was learnable, but what mattered most was finding what they needed to express and having the courage to express it. Lily approached with Jonathan. "That was incredible," the girl said. "I've never heard anything like it." "You will," Emily assured her. "As you develop your own voice, as you learn to trust what you have to say through music." Jonathan, for once, had no words. He simply extended his hand, and when Emily took it, he held on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. A gesture of respect, of recognition that this woman had taught him something essential about humility and humanity. David's parents were waiting nearby. Emily hadn't known how this moment would feel, seeing them for the first time since returning to performance. But when David's mother opened her arms, Emily walked into the embrace without hesitation. "He's not gone," his mother whispered. "Not while you keep playing. He lives in the music." Emily nodded against her shoulder, letting herself cry again, because healing didn't mean not crying. It meant crying and still being okay afterward. Later, after the crowds had dispersed and the hall was mostly empty, Emily stood alone on the stage. The lights were dim now, the cleaning crew working quietly in the aisles. She looked out at the empty seats where thousands had sat listening, where David had sat that last night, proud and loving, and utterly unaware that he had only hours left. "I did it," she said to the empty hall. "I came back, not because I had to prove anything, but because this is who I am, a pianist, your wife, a teacher, someone who survives." The hall was silent, but in that silence, Emily heard something new. Not the crash, not trauma, but the soft echo of possibility, of a future that was uncertain but no longer terrifying. She walked off stage, collected her belongings, and headed out into the Boston night. Tomorrow, she would return to New York, to the Academy and her students, and the life she'd built from the ruins of her old one. But tonight, she'd proven something to herself. That you could return to the places that broke you and find that they'd lost their power to destroy. That time and healing transformed even the most painful memories into something you could hold without bleeding. Emily hailed a cab, gave the driver the address of her hotel, and watched the city slide past the windows. Somewhere in this city, she and David had been happy, had built a life, had dreamed of a future that never came. But she'd built a different future instead, one he'd be proud of, one that honored his memory not by staying frozen in grief, but by continuing to grow and create and connect with others with. The cab pulled up to the hotel. Emily paid the driver, tipped generously, and thanked him by name. Small gestures of recognition that Jonathan had taught her were important. That she'd always known were important, but now practiced with intentionality. In her room, she called the Academy, left a message for her assistant about schedule changes for next week. Texted Lily a photo of the stage, sent a note of gratitude to the Boston Symphony Administration. Then she sat by the window looking out at the city and allowed herself to feel everything. The grief that would never completely disappear. The joy of having played again in this meaningful place. The exhaustion of emotional catharsis. The peace of knowing she'd survived what she'd thought would destroy her. David's ring rested against her heart. A reminder. An anchor. A promise kept. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More students to teach. More performances to prepare. More moments of having to choose courage over fear. But tonight Emily was simply grateful. For music. For second chances. For the stubborn human capacity to heal even when healing seems impossible. She closed her eyes and heard in her mind the opening notes of the Rachmaninoff. Not haunting now, but beautiful. A conversation between past and present, between loss and love, between who she'd been and who she was becoming. And in that music, in that internal sound that needed no piano to exist, Emily found what she'd been seeking for 5 years. Not closure, not an ending, but a beginning. The first notes of a new composition, her life continuing. Different from what she'd planned, but still beautiful, still worth living, still full of music waiting to be played. 1 year after the Boston performance, Hart Music Academy had expanded. What had started as 3 rooms in a Brooklyn brownstone now occupied an entire building. 75 students enrolled, 5 teachers on staff, a waiting list of young musicians eager to learn. But more than the physical growth, the academy had become something Emily hadn't quite anticipated. A community. Students and families and teachers all connected by the belief that music could transform lives. That art wasn't a luxury, but a necessity. That access to beauty and creative expression was a human right, not a privilege. Emily taught every day, though she'd scaled back her performance schedule. She still played concerts, but selectively. Benefits and festivals and intimate venues that felt aligned with her values. She'd turned down multiple offers from major orchestras and international tours, not because she couldn't handle them, but because she'd learned the difference between career success and actual fulfillment. Teaching gave her the latter. Watching students discover their own musical voices, seeing teenagers who'd never touched an instrument finding confidence and purpose through piano lessons, witnessing the way music opened up emotional vocabulary for kids who struggled to express themselves in words. One of her students, Marcus, had come to the academy angry and closed off. A 15-year-old who'd bounced through 3 foster homes in 2 years, who'd been labeled a problem child by schools that didn't have resources to understand his trauma. Emily had recognized something in him immediately. The same defensive walls she'd built after David's death. The same terror that getting close to anything meant risking loss. She'd started him with basic technique, but quickly realized that what Marcus needed wasn't lessons in finger position. He needed permission to feel, to express the rage and grief and fear he'd been carrying alone. Now, 6 months into lessons, Marcus was composing his own pieces. Raw, aggressive music that didn't sound like classical piano should sound. Music that broke rules and made some of the more traditional teachers uncomfortable. But Emily encouraged it, because this was what music was for. Not performing other people's compositions perfectly, but finding your own voice in the chaos. Today, Marcus was performing one of his original pieces at the Academy's small recital. Emily sat in the back row watching as he approached the piano, with his characteristic swagger that barely concealed his nervousness. The piece he'd written was called Concrete Garden. It was angry and beautiful and thoroughly his own. Marcus played with intensity that made some audience members shift uncomfortably, but others leaned forward captivated. because what he was expressing was true. The specific pain of growing up in systems that didn't see you as fully human. The fierce determination to bloom anyway, like flowers breaking through sidewalk cracks. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, and Emily saw tears on Marcus's face. Not sadness, release. The catharsis of being heard. After the recital, parents and students mingled in the academy's common room. Emily moved through the crowd, accepting thanks and deflecting praise. This wasn't about her. It was about creating space for young musicians to discover what she'd learned the hard way, that music could hold everything you couldn't hold alone. Jonathan approached with Lily, who'd just performed a beautiful interpretation of a Debussy prelude. The girl had grown in the past year. Taller, yes, but also more confident, more certain of her own worth and voice. She's extraordinary, Emily told Jonathan. Really extraordinary. I think she should audition for summer programs. Start thinking seriously about conservatory. Lily's face lit up. Jonathan looked uncertain. I thought we'd agreed on business school, he said. Music as a hobby, but something practical for career. He trailed off at Emily's raised eyebrow and Lily's disappointed expression. Right, he said. Sorry, old habits. If this is what Lily wants, then yes. Conservatory, music school, whatever supports her passion. It was still a work in progress, Jonathan's transformation. But he was trying. He'd become a regular donor to music education nonprofits across the city. Had started a foundation in his late wife's name that provided instruments to schools with underfunded arts programs. And most importantly, he'd learned to actually listen to his daughter. Dad's been taking piano lessons too, Lily confided with a grin. Badly, Jonathan admitted. I have no natural talent whatsoever. But Sarah, my wife, used to play. I thought if I learned even just a little, I might understand what she loved about it. Emily felt her throat tighten. That's beautiful, she said. It's humbling, Jonathan corrected. But yes, also beautiful. You were right what you said that night, about every person carrying complexity, about not judging people by their visible circumstances. I'm trying to live differently now. It's uncomfortable, but better. More honest. Later. After the crowd had dispersed and the academy was quiet, Emily sat alone at the piano in the main teaching room. She'd developed a ritual over the past year. At the end of each day, after all the students had left, she played for David. Just a few minutes, sometimes a piece they'd loved, sometimes improvisation, a daily conversation with someone who couldn't answer, but somehow still heard. Tonight she played a new composition she'd been working on, something gentler than After the Silence, a piece about gratitude, about the unexpected gift of continuing to live after you thought your life was over. She was midway through when she heard footsteps. Michael stood in the doorway, having stopped by after his shift at the hotel. Sorry, he said. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting. Emily gestured to a chair. Just talking to a ghost. Michael smiled. He understood. The academy is incredible, Emily. You've built something really special here. We built it, she corrected. You were the first person to see me as human, to protect my privacy when you could have, to give me space to figure out who I was after the music stopped. I wouldn't be here without that kindness. You would have found your way eventually. Maybe, but maybe not. Small kindnesses matter more than we realize. You taught me that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Michael asked, Do you ever regret it? The years you spent hiding, the career opportunities you missed. Emily considered the question. I used to, but I've come to understand that the path was necessary. All of it. The grief, the running, the years of being invisible. They taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. About humility, about what truly matters, about the difference between performing for applause and creating for connection. "You're wise," Michael said. "I'm just someone who survived. That's different from wisdom." "I don't think so." Emily played a few more notes, letting the sound fill the space between words. "I've been thinking about David a lot lately, about what he'd make of all this. The academy, my teaching, the life I built after losing him. What do you think he'd say? That he's proud, that he always knew I was stronger than I believed, that he'd have done the same thing if our positions had been reversed, found a way to keep living, to honor what we had without being destroyed by losing it. That sounds right?" Emily nodded, finishing the composition with a soft cadence. The final notes hung in the air, then faded into silence. "I'm playing a memorial concert next month," she said. 5 years to the day since the accident. I'm calling it Music for David. All proceeds going to a scholarship fund I'm establishing in his name. Full ride for students who've experienced significant loss. Grief shouldn't be a barrier to education. He'd love that. I hope so. I hope wherever he is, if he's anywhere, he knows that I didn't forget him, that everything I do now is in some way because of him, because of what he taught me about love and courage and showing up for the people who matter." Michael stood to leave, then paused. "You know what I think? I think David does know, not because of divine intervention or mystical connection, but because love like what you two had doesn't just disappear. It transforms, becomes part of everything you touch. Every student you teach carries a little piece of David's influence because he shaped who you are, and you shape who they become." After Michael left, Emily sat with those words, turned them over like a precious stone, examining their facets. It was true. David lived in her teaching, in her compassion, in her insistence that music belonged to everyone, not just the privileged few. He lived in Lily's growing confidence, in Marcus's fierce compositions, in every student who walked through the academy's doors and discovered that they had something to express and a language to express it in. Emily pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos. Found one from years ago. Her and David at Juilliard, barely 20 years old, standing in front of a piano looking ridiculously young and hopeful. "We did okay," she said to the photo. "Didn't we? Not the life we planned. But something good anyway, something that matters." Her phone buzzed. A text from Lily. "Thank you for believing in me. I'm auditioning for Juilliard's summer program. Wish me luck." Emily smiled and typed back. "You don't need luck. You have talent, dedication, and something more important. You have yourself. That's enough." She thought about her own time at Juilliard, the late-night practice sessions, the terror and exhilaration of being surrounded by other prodigies, the way David had walked into her life during a particularly frustrating rehearsal and somehow made everything better just by existing. Those memories didn't hurt the same way anymore. The sharp edges had worn smooth. She could hold them without bleeding, could recognize them as beautiful even though they came from a life that no longer existed. This, Emily realized, was what healing actually looked like. Not forgetting, not getting over it, but integrating, carrying the past as part of the present without being crushed by its weight. She stood stretched, feeling the familiar ache in her hands from a full day of teaching and playing. She'd turn 40 soon. Hard to believe that a decade had passed since the accident, that she'd lived more of her life after David's death than she'd lived with him. Sometimes she wondered what they'd be like now if he'd survived. Would they have children? A house in the suburbs? Would their careers have flourished or faded? Would they still be deeply in love? Or would ordinary life have eroded their passion? She'd never know. That was the nature of loss. It froze people in time, preserving them as they were, while you continued to change and grow without them. But she chose to believe that their love would have lasted, that they'd have figured out how to balance two demanding careers and family life, that they'd have grown old together, still finishing each other's sentences, still communicating in the secret language of music that only they fully understood. Emily locked up the academy, setting the alarm and turning off lights. Outside, Brooklyn hummed with evening activity. She walked toward the subway, the familiar route home automatic now. As she walked, she heard music everywhere, in the rhythm of her own footsteps, in the distant laughter from a bar, in the hiss of steam from a manhole cover. The city was a symphony, and she was part of it. One instrument in the great composition of human life. Her phone buzzed again. An email from Boston Symphony Hall. They wanted her to return for their 20th anniversary concert series. A chance to perform the Rachmaninoff again, this time with full orchestra and international streaming. Emily considered it as she descended into the subway station. A year ago, she might have said yes immediately. The validation of being wanted. The ego boost of performing on a prestigious stage. But now she thought about what accepting would mean. Hours of practice taking time away from teaching. The pressure and scrutiny. The travel and publicity. All the aspects of concert performance that had nothing to do with music itself and everything to do with the business of fame. She typed a polite decline, thanked them for thinking of her, suggested several brilliant young pianists they might consider instead. Then she put her phone away and boarded the train feeling lighter. She'd performed her resurrection, had proven to herself and the world that she could return to concert stages. That was enough. She didn't need to keep proving it. Her work now was different, more personal, more immediate. Teaching Marcus to channel his rage into beauty, helping Lily find her voice, creating a space where music was about connection and expression rather than competition and acclaim. This was her legacy, not the concerts she'd performed or the reviews she'd received, but the young musicians she'd helped discover their own power, the community she'd built, the understanding that art could heal what medicine and time could not. At her stop, Emily climbed back up into the cool evening air. Her apartment was modest, a far cry from the luxury she could have afforded if she'd taken all those concert offers. But it was enough. A piano, books, photographs, everything she needed. She made tea and settled at her own piano, not in the academy, but here in her private space. Started working on a new composition, something for the memorial concert. A piece about love persisting beyond death, about the ways people shape each other and how that shaping continues even after loss. The music flowed through her fingers, not tentative anymore, not haunted, just honest. True. A conversation between past and present, between who she'd been and who she'd become. Outside her window, the city continued its ceaseless motion. Millions of people living their lives, carrying their own losses, finding their own ways through grief and toward something that might be called healing. Emily was one of them, no longer special or separate, just human. And that she'd learned was the greatest gift, to be ordinarily human, to hurt and heal, to lose and somehow keep living, to find beauty in the most unexpected places. She played until her hands grew tired, until the night had deepened around her. Then she stopped, stood, and walked to the window. Looked out at the lights of Brooklyn stretching toward Manhattan's glowing skyline. "Thank you," she said to the night, to David, to music, to whatever force had kept her alive when she'd wanted to die. Thank you for letting me find my way back." The city offered no answer. But in the silence that followed her words, Emily heard something. Not a voice, not a message. Just the profound quiet that comes after you've said what needed to be said. She turned from the window, ready for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to turn pain into something that lifted others. But tonight she was simply Emily Hart, a pianist, a teacher, a widow, a survivor, a complete human being who'd been broken and mended and was learning to trust that the mending would hold. And in the darkness of her apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life rebuilt from ruins, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years: at peace. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because she'd learned to carry it, to use it, to transform it into something that served life rather than death. The ring still rested against her heart. David's presence still shaped her days. But she wasn't frozen anymore, wasn't stuck in the moment of loss. She was moving forward, creating, teaching, living. And somewhere she chose to believe David was proud.